Long time no see, card fighters. In today's video, we're going to take a look at my Hound-Raiser AoE deck for the current format of card fight Vanguard. Now, Hound-Raisers are an archetype within the Keter Sanctuary Nation that follow using high beasts for multiple attacks, resource management, and other forms of patterns and styles of play. But the current support for this deck is okay. It can do some pretty cool things as well as make some pretty unique styles of play and forms of attacks. It has access to unique cards that give you different defensive and offensive options, as well as the fact that the resource management piece is actually really good for the deck, and the deck itself isn't expensive in terms of using cost. But with that being said, we're going to head over to camera 2 and get this deck profile and just showcase everything I've learned from the past couple weeks I've been playing this deck. Now, to start things off with our ride line, I am playing the Hound-Raiser ride line for Hound-Raisers. This is the most functional ride line to play. Asumi and Hakorin can compress your deck for a high beast as well as a Hound-Raiser unit, which can give you extra offense or defense options depending on what turn you're going, as well as what matchup you're going for, what pieces you might need. This deck, from my personal experience, works better going first because despite its biggest weakness being that all of your cards don't turn on until your opponent is grade 3, you still want to go first to set up and get the pieces that you need, so after you survive your opponent's first grade 3 turn, you can hit them with your max capacity attack patterns on your following turn. So the Hound-Raiser line is just the best to go for compression as well as setup. Moving on to main deck grade 3s, obviously we're playing 3 copies of our Persona Ride target, Houndrazer AoE. AoE as a Vanguard is pretty cool. The 5k bonus to all of your high beasts in the back row, as well as the main deck compression and her multi-attack plays with the drive checks, give her a variety of options in making all of your Hound Beast or high beast cards in the future, anything that comes out, a lot better, as well as making them much better in terms of numbers. This deck, I will give it credit for, even on its first turn with pieces as well as certain support, can actually make magic numbers fairly easy because of the 5k bonus, and all of the high beasts that we have so far in terms of support have power effects of their own, so it's not uncommon for this deck to go into its first turn and make 28, 33k prior to triggers and effects 4 columns. Obviously, when your opponent hits grade 3, you get access to more power, and then you get her drive check effect, which adds more card advantage as well as more pressure in terms of additional triggers that you might pull on your turns, depending on what you get. She's a pretty decent Vanguard. Obviously, when Hound-Raisers get their next wave with support, which as their promo, as well as more high beast in the future, this deck will definitely be a little bit more competitive, but in terms of a generic Vanguard, I actually think that AoE is pretty cool. For my next grade 3, it is 4 copies of Houndrazer Seishin. This card is ironically your best offensive and defensive support card. Its first effect to turn all of your high beasts in the back row and interceptors is actually relevant. Getting that additional 5k shield as well as 10k shield from certain high beasts that we might get in the future is a huge deal. This deck, I will say, while it is very aggressive and there's a lot of superior calling and compression, in terms of its card advantage, it's not the best. Until you get that additional drive check from AoE, you don't have ways of actually adding a lot of other cards to your hand, and the deck tries to mitigate this issue by giving you a lot of effects that give you superior calling, as well as your ride line and your Vanguard's ability and another support card in the deck and the promo in the future. You need Seishin's ability to get extra defensive cards on the board. You'll have like 1 or 2 high beasts depending on what your setup looks like, but having the extra 10k or even 2 5k shields is a big deal because of the number of attacks that can happen in opponents' turns right now, especially at this point of Vanguard right now. Any sort of defensive buff you can get is well appreciated. Its offensive skill additional critical is really good as well. You can make this card a match number along with a booster, immediately putting it over 33k with a critical benefit, so that this way, regardless of whatever triggers you pull, you will have 1 card in the field that adds some extra aggression to your attack patterns for your 4 attack turns. And for my Regali's piece, because it is a grade 3, 1 copy of Bracing Angel Adder. This deck does not like control. Bracing Angel Adder gives you additional soul to activate AoE, another card to draw, and cycle this card out, additional 5k power, while most importantly protecting your rear guards. Cards like Seishin, as well as our high beast in the back row that we'll need for extra support, and the support cards we have on the board. In a deck that doesn't have a lot of card advantage, we need to protect them. It's really good against things like Artisaria, Odium, Blangdemeyer, especially when they're using their effects to start knocking away your pieces, and they can swing with such high power right now. You need the additional protection from this card. I don't think any of the other Regali's pieces are worth playing. Now, moving on to my grade 2s. For my first grade 2, it is 4 copies of Houndrazer Mishiro. Another strong support piece as well as resource management piece. Mishiro is another card that can compress your deck for a high beast unit to set up your board. And then on attack at any period in the game, as long as she's supported by a high beast, you get the soul charge. Obviously, this is set up for AoE and any other effects you might have that require soul in the deck, like your cyclers or whatever additional soul blast effects you choose to add. But her secondary skill is probably her best one, is addition to her first effect to compress your deck deck for a high beast. She gets 10k power when she attacks if you have 2 or more high beasts in the back row. So this is obviously good because when you're going, again, when your opponent's at grade 3 Vanguard, and you're still 10k buff on top of the 5k buff from your high beast and things like that, this card alone in a single column can easily reach up to 38,000 prior to triggers and effects, giving you more compression, more power, and resources all in one card. For my next grade 2, it is 3 copies of Hound-Raiser Hanami. One of the newer Hound-Raiser support units to come out. Hanami is an interesting card to least. So she has 2 effects. Her first one lets her at 5k when your back row high beast attacks, but her second effect, which is locked by your opponent, unfortunately being a grade 3, she can give 5k to any unit when that back row unit attacks as well. This is huge for the deck because your high beasts are the targets of your effect, and unfortunately we don't have a grade 3 high beast that's functional in this deck right now. So being able to give additional 5k to the back row high beast unit, which is usually going to be a grade 1 that will have a 5k buff on top of itself in most cases, means that you can make those cards a magic number on top of other effects. This is good because things like the grade 1 Regawan as well as your Melgawan, who have power up effects, and then one has a battle door effect, you can actually make Regawan's battle door effect attack competent, and then you can make Megawan actually a magic number on top of the drive checks that those units will have once your opponent has hit grade 3. Her secondary effect is more of a niche one and really only good in certain matchups, but she can retire herself to add a protection effect to any one of your Houndrazer units or high beast cards. This is nice in certain matchups, like against Odium, against Artisaria specifically. You can protect your front row Houndrazer or high beast cards to make sure that this way they're not being locked or retired, like things like Seishin or whatnot that have those defensive effects that you need or offensive skills. It's neat to have. It clears out a circle as well by retiring itself, so you can set up for another one of your piece because your Houndrazer cards are all grade 2 or higher ones that are actually competent and do things. So Hanami's secondary effect is a niche one, but her first effect is probably her most important. For my next grade 2, and this is a personal tech of mine, from my Halmveld deck, I am playing 3 copies of Denuse of Slender Sword Diana in this deck. As you've seen so far with most of the Houndrazer support, a lot of our power-up effects and our good skills don't get active till our opponent is at grade 3. And this deck, since you do want to go first to take the time to build up some sort of card advantage, survive what your opponent can do, and set up for your following turn, you need something in the early game that can actually give you that push. And I didn't feel like a cycler was needed because despite the deck not having the best card advantage, I don't feel like that one additional card you can get from a Biscotti or a Spiral Cutie or even the Persona Shield ticket getter was worth it to me. I'd rather push. This deck it just makes more sense to push in a deck like this. So I decided to go back to Diana. This deck can immediately, every single turn from grade 2 and up, always call something out from deck due to Aoi's effect, as well as from the effect of your ride line and something like Mishiro. You have plenty of options of calling out from deck and doing it consistently, and unlike when I was playing in Halmveld, it's actually a little bit better in this deck because you can use the effect during the main phase to set up, so you always get access to the power prior to your other attacks. Now, this card is better, obviously, in the early game because once you hit your grade 3 Aoi and your opponent's at grade 3, things like Mashiro as well as Seishin just become better offensive pieces to have. But Diana in the early game is one of the stronger cards to play because if you open with 2 of these in the early game, or if you just see 1, you've already got 1 card that's a 20k, and you can focus on using other cards in your hand to support your weaker attackers that don't have their power-up effects because your opponent's not a grade 3 yet. And I have 2 more orders for my lineup. It is 2 copies of A Warrior's Rest. Now, this is a tech that I see a lot of people pay for this deck, but I'm personally playing it because of the Levy Dress matchup. Now, the Levy Dress matchup is really hard for this deck despite all the power-up effects that you get. 1, because if you go first against Levy Dress, you get all your power-up skills and it helps even out the numbers. But 2, if you go second and they start setting up your like 3 Infinity Eyes markers on your board, you need something to help get that additional power because despite Aoi, despite your other card effects, they all get 5k benefits and you need more power on top of that. So this card really is just for that particular matchup, and then obviously if you see in the early game, it helps push too. And then it doesn't use up any vital resource that we can't get back. We have a resource management piece that can recharge 1 energy, and even with Seishin's energy blasts, we can still get energy to keep doing this. I know a lot of like people that play this deck, I've seen them max out at 4. I don't feel like that's necessary. I think that 2 is perfectly fine because of the reason that I play it, to deal with one of the hardest matchups that this deck has. Now moving on to grade 1s, we can finally get into the dogs of the deck. Our first one is 3 copies of Melgawan. This is one of our beatstick pieces. Melgalwan can become a 13k booster as well as a 18k attacker from the AoE before the AoE boost from the back row, and he's one of our resource management pieces. He gets you a soul charge or energy charge on place, which is obviously important because this deck uses all the costs you can, counterblast, soul blast, energy blast in this deck. So having a resource management piece and get back at least 2 of those resources is pretty huge. For Medics Grade 1, it is 3 copies of Raygalwan. This is our offensive defensive piece that we can utilize in the deck combined with Scission. Raygalwan's first effect to gain Battle Door effect is really good on your AoE turns when you're going second. This way you can force more cards in your opponent's hand for a minimal number of attack when it has a drive check on it. That's a pretty big deal. Obviously combined with Hanami, this card will become an 18k attacker, and now guarding actually does matter, and your opponent cannot get away with just intercepting to help deny that. The secondary effect is good. This is another defensive piece you play in the deck. Free 10k shield is always good. Combine that with Scission, this on the board, you have more defensive options to take advantage of. For Medics Grade 1, and obviously the most powerful card in Keter Sanctuary, or one of them right now, 4 copies of Stragety. It is a high beast, it is really expensive, but if you want to play this deck at full power, you need a playset of this. It's your best consistency piece as well as strongest booster that you'll have access to in the early game to help obviously make sure your numbers are good. Combined with cards like Diana, A Warrior's Rest, you can easily reach up to like 33k columns going Grade 2 against Grade 1 against your opponent to make good numbers, as well as use this card in the future to continue digging for your non-searchable pieces, which are any of your Grade 2 or higher cards, because those are all not high beast. 3 Keter PGs, 1 copy of Elementaria. Now moving on to triggers, my trigger lineup for this deck has fluctuated a bit, but I finally just settled on the good old-fashioned 8 critical, with 4 being the regular, 4 being the effects, 3 draws. I'm using the red OT for this deck, followed by 4 generic heals. Now I'm using a normal setup for this deck because I discovered that fronts were cool, but the card advantage issue in this deck is annoying to deal with that sometimes. If you have to guard too much, or if you don't guard heavily enough, you're kind of screwed, and the fronts don't really matter if you don't have a board, if you can't set up for it. So draws were just better in that sense. Obviously we max out our crits because we have 3 drive checks, especially when we go second against our opponent and they're on Grade 3. And then the red OT because I feel like the additional attack from the deck on top of the additional power actually will be annoying. The only other OT that I actually liked for this deck, I was going to say it was the purple OT, but when I finally actually tried it, it was annoying in some sense, because if you pull the purple OT on the back row attack, it's annoying to deal with, and then if you swing with AoE and you haven't rested your other rear guards yet, you got to heal out of damage, but you didn't get to take advantage of anything, so you don't get to maximize on the 5 attacks. The red OT was just better for that. You get to maximize on 5 attacks with this deck, and does interrupt your attack patterns or the board that you have set up for your following turn. My final thoughts on Houndrazer currently right now is this deck doesn't get strong until it gets its promo, as well as the next wave of high beast support. The lack of high beasts in the nation itself doesn't give you a lot of options to work with, and even sort of like the funny tech options you can do they're not optimal to work with this deck either. It's a really simple and fun deck to play. You're doing 4 attacks every turn, you've got early game rush, at least my variation of this deck has that, and then obviously you can make good numbers all of your cards, you got defensive options, you got a little bit of everything in this deck to like really make it fun outside of like any sort of control. But I think that Hound-Raisers in the future have a lot of potential to be good. This deck is not hopeless whatsoever. It just needs the right wave of support and at least one broken like high beast card to make this deck actually be optimal at work in terms of maximizing its full attack power to make it one of the more competitive decks of this format. But you guys tell me in the comment section below, what do you think of Hound-Raisers? How are you guys approaching this deck? And let's get a discussion going. With that being said, y'all, I am your host, Prime Vanguard, and I'll catch you later. Peace.